The topic for tonight is remembering to say thank you. I want to start with some observations about last night and then to talk about this subject in general terms. Iran shot at least 350 munitions at Israel last night, including drones and cruise missiles and other things. 99% of them were knocked down before they reached Israel. A few got through, did some damage to an Air Force base, but the base remained fully operational in spite of the damage. So, with that kind of attack, with absolutely no results, as revenge for Israel eliminating one of the top generals in the Iranian regime, plus I think another 4 or 5 of his top advisors, not one Israeli was killed, not even injured. There were a couple of Bedouins who got hurt by falling debris. I think that requires a sense of gratitude. Also, it should be noted that Israel didn't deter this attack on its own. The United States was shooting down the missiles. Jordan shot down dozens of missiles that entered its airspace with its jets. England was using the RAF fighters to shoot down missiles. A lot of allies participated in the effort of protecting Israel. And I think in the larger historical perspective, something that struck me many years ago, I haven't mentioned it recently, but I think it's true. We live surrounded by Arab Muslim countries. If they were to all unite in earnest to wipe out the Jewish state, in natural terms, it would be very, very difficult to resist them. Now, the truth is, they are divided along 2 different dimensions. Some are rich and some are poor. Some have great natural resources, so they're very rich, and some are poor. Some are Sunni and some are Shiite, which puts them at religious tension with one another. But there's one thing they all agree on, fervently, passionately, that Israel shouldn't exist. I don't think it should be taken for granted that in spite of their differences with one another, they don't get together on this one issue that they agree on and work to eliminate Israel. That's been true for the 70 years that the country is in existence. Always the divisions between them make it very difficult for them to cooperate. I don't think that's accidental. I think it's a matter of the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu runs history, so that prevents them from uniting on something which, in naturalistic terms, they would be able to achieve and would be to their benefit. So, we have to appreciate what we are receiving. But now, there's a deeper dimension here. The phrase in Hebrew for gratitude is hakaras hatov. Literally, hakaras hatov means recognizing good. I thought about that for a long time, and I thought to myself, hakaras hatov doesn't do justice to the English concept of gratitude. Because the English concept of gratitude has 2 parts. First of all, I should recognize that I received something of value. My life, my condition, my circumstances are better because of what I've received. But that's not enough. I also express my appreciation to the one who gave it to me. Gratitude requires both. It seemed to me that if hakaras hatov just means recognizing the good, it's a much thinner concept. It doesn't include appreciating the giver. So I wondered why the translation of hakaras hatov would be gratitude. I think I've discovered an answer. That you have to read the hakaras hatov double. Number one, I recognize that what I have received is good for me. And number two, I recognize that it comes from the goodness in the giver. It's the goodness of the gift, together with the goodness of the giver that prompted him to give the gift, that equals gratitude. Those two recognitions of Tov will be that, of course, a normal person will then express his appreciation for what he's received and from whom he has received it, and that's gratitude. But it requires a double recognition. And this is especially important when there are circumstances where it's not easy to see what the good is in the thing that's received, or not easy to see what the good is in the giver. And then becomes a challenge to see the good in such a way as to be able to express gratitude. One, I'm going to quote my Rebbe a couple of times tonight because she's really brilliant and inspirational. There is an idea of confronting people with their failures and criticizing them so that they'll improve. It's called tochacha in Hebrew. It's a mitzvah, and it has an effect if a person is committing a certain crime, doing something that's inappropriate, and he has not yet been confronted, and his level of guilt is at a certain level. But if he's been confronted and still continues to do it, his level of guilt goes up because he's been confronted by it, he can't pretend he doesn't understand or appreciate it anymore, and he continues. So then it gets worse. Now, realizing that that's the purpose and the effect of tochacha, it's very important to hear, like from the Chazon Ish, that no one anymore knows how to do tochacha. I don't know how to do it. Which means, number one, if we're going to criticize someone, we have to realize we can't just say, I'm doing a mitzvah, because you're not doing the mitzvah. You're not doing it right, you're not accomplishing it. So there's got to be some other way to explain what you're doing. And number two, it won't happen in our times that the person goes through the warning and thereby becomes more guilty because we're not doing the mitzvah the way it should be done. Rav Nachman Braslov also writes about this subject, and he says also that it's difficult or impossible for us to do the mitzvah the appropriate way, but we can do is this. When we see something that a person's doing, and he's doing it in an inappropriate way, and you want to speak to him about it, find the good in him and speak to the good. That might be a tough job. And maybe his good is invisible to you, in which case I think he would tell you, don't talk to him. Find the good in him and speak to the good. Here's a simple way to do that with children, and of course it could apply to adults as well. When a child does something which is destructive or painful, you say to him, I'm very surprised. You're better than that. That's not you, not the real you, not worthy of you. You can do better than that. You are better than that. So who are you talking to? You're not telling him you're failed, you're guilty, you're a criminal, and so forth and so on. No, you are really better than that. And you can do better than that. Then you're appealing to the good side of him to make it stronger and give it the inspiration to take control of the situation, rather than trying to crush the bad side of him. So that's an exercise in looking for the good in the other person. When you have a discussion, a debate, an argument a verbal battle with somebody, one strategy is, number one, always to validate the person's point of view. I say, listen, we disagree about this, but I can see how someone with your education and your life experience would arrive at your conclusion. Well, education is good, right? Life experience is usually good, and you're telling him it's quite reasonable for you, given where you're coming from, to arrive at that conclusion. That's giving him credit. Then you ask him, but maybe you could understand that I, who've had a different life experience and a different starting place, would come to a different conclusion, just asking for 50-50. And then also try to agree. Take anything that you could possibly agree on. So he says, forever and ever you have to do A. I said, listen, on the third Thursday of the 7th month of each year, I agree with you. You're done on that day, you definitely have to do A. I agree with you 100%. He's talking 365 days a year. You're talking 1 day a year, but you're agreeing with him on that 1 day. Find a point of agreement. That also means you're acknowledging there's something that you agree with, that you think is appropriate. Finding that means you present yourself to him as someone who's looking for the good in him. You're not looking to pull him down. You're not looking to disqualify him. You're not looking to act out your superiority on him. On the contrary, you're looking to share with him and appreciate him. So that's the idea of looking to the good in the person. Now, when you receive something from someone, part of the gratitude lies in recognizing why he gave it to you. And although I think that even if a person gives it to you without positive character in the gift, you still owe him some gratitude. But there's no question that the reason that he gives it to you is a matter of part of the gratitude. So if you work hard to look for the good in the person, then that will increase your ability to feel genuine gratitude. Now let's suppose that the person gives it to you only because he's embarrassed not to. He didn't intend to give to you. He was giving to a bunch of people and you weren't supposed to find out. But you did find out. And on paper, you have equal qualifications. He doesn't like you. He doesn't like you. And he wouldn't have given it to you. But now that you know that you're in that group of qualifications, and therefore you're expecting your turn also, and then if you don't get, you're going to be perhaps embarrassed, and you're going to be upset, and you may talk about it and so on. So to protect himself against that outcome, he gives you. So you think, what kind of appreciation do I have to show to him? He's only doing it in order to avoid embarrassment. Well, let's think. He doesn't want to be embarrassed about what? He doesn't want to be embarrassed that he didn't recognize your qualifications. He didn't want to be embarrassed about the fact that he's prejudiced against you. Well, let's see. Aren't those real faults? He doesn't recognize your qualifications, or he's prejudiced against you. Aren't those real faults? To say he doesn't want to be embarrassed about it means that if it came out, it was known, he would be embarrassed. So he's a person who would be embarrassed if real faults became public knowledge. Not everybody's like that. Some people don't recognize that they're faults at all. And some people, even though they recognize that they're faults, are so passionately invested in what they're doing, they don't care if people find out. There's a certain positive quality to his character that he would be embarrassed by people finding out that he has those faults. It means he recognizes them as faults. That's positive. So if that's part of where the money's coming from, it's not just crass and selfish. On the contrary, there's a certain elevated appreciation there of what's important in life, which you can see as part of the good from which it's coming. I mentioned in the previous year conscious money. I think all three of you here in the previous year? Yeah, okay. So, the idea of conscious money is where a person gives money to someone important because he got it illegally or immorally. And that's not totally empty either, because there's a verse that says, Sofa Rasha Latzadik Umvakesh Hamiso. The Rasha, the wicked person, observes the righteous person and wants to kill him. And if you want to kill somebody, you're not going to give him money. So if this guy gives money to an important person, it means he doesn't want to kill him. If he doesn't want to kill him, then he's not that Rasha, not that wicked person that the verse is talking about. So he isn't totally wicked. So a person who gives conscious money, that has a positive aspect to it. Now there's a whole kind of systematic training of looking for the good in the person, or, in a more minimal case, minimizing the evil in the person. And that way also can up your appreciation of the person, and if there is any kind of benefit that you get from him, you'll be able to recognize it's coming from a good source. So again, Rav Nachman Abrastov says that the Mishnah says you should judge every person positively. So if you look at the Rambam there, if the person that you are, what happens is a person does something and it's not clear what he did. And it could be interpreted as good or bad, and the question is, how should you interpret it? And the Mishnah says, interpret it positively. So the Rambam says, who are we talking about? Are we talking about a great tzaddik, righteous, pious saint? No, because you don't need the Mishnah to tell you that. Your logic should tell you that. If he has an outstanding record of good actions and good character, and he does something which could be interpreted as good or bad, of course you should interpret it as good. That will be consistent with what you know about him. And vice versa. If a person who's vicious and criminal does something that could be interpreted as good or bad, interpret it as bad. The Mishnah is not telling you to be irrational. The Mishnah is telling you when a person with a mediocre record does something which is ambiguous and it could go either way, then interpret it for good. That at least isn't irrational. But now suppose you see the person do something and it's clearly wrong. And it's clear that he knew that it was wrong. What room do you have left? Well, you might ask yourself, what pressures is he under? What else is going on in his life? How calmly, coolly, and decidedly vicious is this? I was a disciple of the Boston Rabbi of Boston for 47 years. I was in his shul where I davened every day. In the morning, one day, and someone came in and started yelling at the Rebbe in public. I was shocked. And after a couple of minutes, I couldn't take it anymore. So I pushed myself in between them, facing this other person, and I just pushed him out the door. I mean, he didn't fall on the ground, but I just made sure he got out the door. I turned back in, went over to the Rebbe. The Rebbe was quite calm. Man, he was yelling at him and saying terrible things in public. I thought, how does the Rebbe do that? How does he manage that? So I asked him, and he said, I know what's going on at home. So I thought, So Rebbe knows something about his private life, which explains why he did that. And therefore he looks at it differently. I have a rule which I think is true. I wouldn't say there are no exceptions, but I think it's generally true. A person who causes pain is in pain. Because if he weren't in pain, what would he get out of causing pain? What would it give him? What benefit would he have? A person who's not in pain either keeps to himself or wants other people to have good. So if he causes me pain, I have to think, he's suffering. So if he's suffering, my first response to him should be pity, sympathy. He's suffering. That will dilute my negative evaluation of him tremendously. I think of him now as a victim rather than as a cool, calculated perpetrator. Yeah.
Yeah, Rabbi, just to address this point, it's this Hamas terrorist, like, how would we apply this conception or not apply it? Just to clarify it.
I'm sure you understood when I said in the previous hour that humanitarian aid is for humans. That meant to exclude certain people. I would want to know whether they enjoy inflicting that kind of pain on each other. Would one Hamas member rape another Hamas member's sister and enjoy it and film it on GoPro and put it up on his? I doubt it. I doubt it. There are people who have been sold a false picture of the world, and it's not their fault. And really, those who have persuaded them of this vicious evil are much more much more to blame than the people themselves. So that's a point that could be discussed at more length. But I think that there too, if you go into the psychology of it, if a person pretended to be a follower of Hamas and was just stealing money from the organization, and he's going around killing people so he gets access to the money, and he's building a Swiss bank account, and when he gets to $500 million, he's going to leave Hamas, he's going to go to Switzerland and enjoy himself. That's really corrupt. That's really corrupt. But if you're told that these people are, delaying the Messianic era and all the rest, and you have no particular reason to doubt the people who are telling you these things, so it changes their level of guilt to a great extent, I think. Okay, so now that's a way of increasing the hakaras hatov that you have. Now, our sources. Well, let me say something else also. What about the idea that the amount of gratitude that I owe the other person varies with the amount of loss that he has in giving me the good that he gives me? I think that's also true. Someone who's really tight, he's very, very under great monetary pressure, and he helps me monetarily, earns more of gratitude than someone, if I go to Bill Gates and I'll say, sure, here's $1 million. I mean, he wouldn't notice it if $6 million went down the drain, So, but that doesn't mean I have no gratitude to him. My life is better because of what he did for me. And that, by itself, requires gratitude. And this is similar to another mistake that people make. You hear parents say, I owe Ruvain a lot. He did ABC for me, and as a result, I did something, I accomplished something, and I was tremendously in a much better position. And if he hadn't been there for me, I wouldn't have made it. That's how a person expresses the reason for his gratitude. I think the last part, if he hadn't been there, I wouldn't have made it, is tricky. I think it's tricky. First of all, how do you know that? How do you know if he hadn't been there, there wouldn't have been somebody else who would have done it for you? Do you really know that? It's very difficult to know that. And especially if you have our picture of how the world runs, where Kodesh Baruch Hu is running the world, if he hadn't been there, how do you know that Kodesh Baruch Hu wouldn't have put someone in his place to do for you what you needed? Ultimately, there are exceptions, but normally, if you receive something, it's because the Kodesh Baruch Hu wanted you to receive it, and he could arrange it in many different ways. So first of all, it's very hard to know whether, in fact, had he not been there, then you wouldn't have had that benefit. But then I think, in principle, there's also something wrong. It's as if to say that the reason why I owe him this gratitude is because he put me in his position, and without him I wouldn't have been there. Which makes it sound like if he hadn't done it, somebody else would have done it, then I don't owe him any gratitude. So let me give you an example. A person is in an automobile accident and he's in danger of dying. And he's brought into the emergency room, and the emergency doctor works hard and saves his life. So afterwards, when he recovers, he says, "Doctor, I'm so grateful to you. You saved my life. Had it not been for you, I'd have been dead." And the doctor says, "What do you mean? If I hadn't been on duty, some other doctor would have been on duty. And he could have saved your life also. What do you mean, if it weren't for me, you'd have been dead?" Maybe, given where the accident was and where the hospital was, it was sure you were going to live. Just a question of who's going to do it. Should the person in the accident say, "Oh, gee, doctor, I didn't even think of that. Thanks for pointing it out. So I won't say thank you." I don't think that's the right result. He did save his life, didn't he? If he did save his life, then he's owed a debt of gratitude because he saved his life. In philosophical terms, we distinguish between a sufficient condition and a necessary condition. A sufficient condition is what makes something happen. A necessary condition is something which, without it, it wouldn't happen. Not always when you have a sufficient condition is it also necessary. Let's suppose somebody has to be assassinated, right? And there are 3 assassins, and they all 3 fire bullets. Well, the first bullet hits him and he goes down, and the other 2 bullets go through the air. Well, what would have happened if the first bullet hadn't hit him? Then the second bullet would have hit him. The only reason the second bullet didn't hit him is because the first bullet knocked him down. So, still, the first bullet killed him, right? And if they think, in this case, the assassination is murder, the first person, they can't say, "But without you, I would have been alive." No, you'd have been dead anyway, but this one killed you. So you're measured not only by what you're necessary for, you're measured by what you do. If you make something happen, you have responsibility for it. If it's good, you deserve credit. And if it's bad, you deserve censure and blame. And that doesn't require that you be the difference between it's happening and not happening. Now, all these reflections apply to expressing gratitude to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. First of all, you have to recognize that what's happening to you is for the good. And sometimes that's very difficult. Sometimes what happens to people causes them tremendous suffering. Even the very greats of Jewish history suffered. I have heard people say, if I was on his level, if God would speak to me and I would be a prophet, I would sail through life. Everything would be wonderful. Everything would be joyous. That's not true. It's just not true. Avram's first son, Yishmael, in his young life, was quite challenged, as they would say today, morally and spiritually. Sarah realized it. Avram did not. Sarah said, "Throw him and his mother out." And it says, "Vayichar hadavar ma'od b'nei Avraham." It was very evil in Abraham's eyes. And then HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to him, "Do it anyway. Do it anyway." She knows what she's talking about. She's right, you're wrong. You have to follow her. That wasn't easy for Abraham. He didn't sail through that. Indeed, when Yitzchak is born, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to him, Yitzchak is going to be his continuation. He's going to have a child. He's going to have a child. The first words that Abraham says is, "Lu Yishmael liyichel lefanecha." But what about Yishmael? He loved Yishmael. Kicking him out was hard. Doing the Akedah, the sacrifice of Isaac, I've mentioned this a couple of times. When he's finished, the angel says to him, when he speaks the second time, God swears that he's going to do various things for you. The Midrash asks, why is God swearing? What is this oath for? And the Midrash says, Abraham said to God, "You're giving me these benefits because I did this great deed. Swear to me you'll never test me again, not me or Isaac." Wow! That means he didn't sail through it. On the contrary, it was very, very difficult. Very difficult and very painful. Not to mention all the decades that they didn't have children, to the extent that Sarah gave up in despair and said, take Hagar to wife, another wife for her husband, so I'll be built up through her. And it failed. Not only was she so desperate to have children that she proposed this strategy, but it didn't work, because it was another 13 years before she had children. Isaac and Rivka had 2 children, Jacob and Esau. Esau was an epitome of evil, and they knew that, and they lived with it. And Rav Hirsch says it was their failure. They brought him up in an incorrect way. Boy, oh boy, to have a child who turns out to be supremely evil, and to know that you had some hand in his development as evil, that's tragic. And they lived with that. They didn't sail through life. Jacob, when he thought that Joseph was dead, didn't have prophecy for 20 years because he wasn't joyful. He wasn't sailing through it. Read the verses in Psalms of what King David suffered from the things that he went through. He suffered probably every pain that a person could suffer. He lost 2 children. One of his children rebelled against him and had to fight a civil war against him. He was a fugitive to the point where he was hiding out with a non-Jewish king, and then the king turned against him and he had to pretend to be crazy in order to get out in one piece. I mean, he went through terrible things. His childhood was terrible. We'll talk about that tomorrow. We're doing Hal in the Haggadah. So the great people of Israel didn't have these smooth, comfortable lives. So how did they manage? How did they manage? Because they had to be able to see the good in what was happening to them. That's not always easy. Now, I'll give you 3 examples of how this can be done on the basis of classical sources, 2 of which I had from the Rebbe. We just took a trip to Europe, and she was speaking to the people on the trip, and she made 2 points which were, to me, very enlightening. But the first one is one which I have mentioned in the past. Let's say that a person loses a close relative, a parent. So when you are at the funeral, there's a point at which they're going to rip your clothes, and you say the blessing, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, Dayan ha'emes, which means the judge of truth, or the true judge, and then they rip the clothes. That's the signal. Just like when you come to grips, when you rip something, it's gone. You can't sew it up, you can't use it. It's a very poignant piece. Some people break down; they can hardly say the words. The Gemara says that you should be able to say that blessing with joy. Phew, that's really surprising. And does it mean you should be joyful and not say it? Not be in pain? So the commentators say that's wrong. It's not possible not to be in pain. Well, does it mean that you should have both joy and pain? Maybe that's possible. And indeed, there are some occasions in which that's true. This may surprise you, but if a person's father dies and he's rich, the son says, Dayan ha'emes, on the loss of his father, and at the same time says either Hatova Meiti v'Shechayanu, on the fact that he inherited a lot of money. Right there, the funeral for my father, I'm going to say a blessing on something good? Yeah, because it happened. I was at the Shiva of a certain Rebbe for his father, and another Rebbe came in to offer his condolences. And when he finished offering condolences for the loss, he said, Mazel Tov, Rebbe, because this one who was at Shiva inherited the position from his father. He now became Rebbe, and that's something which was real, genuine, and happy, and he took notice of it. That's where you have pain and happiness simultaneously from 2 different causes. From 2 different causes. And that's possible. But what the Torah and the Shulchan Aruch say here about saying the blessing with joy is much more subtle. Much more subtle and much more nuanced. It says that when you have an opportunity to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu in pain, and in particular to accept the pain in love, knowing that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is doing this because he loves you, that service is a very great service. It's a very great mitzvah. And the joy that you have is in the opportunity to do that mitzvah. Here, the joy is because you have the pain. It's because of the pain. If the joy drives out the pain, then the joy has no basis. So here the person says, the pain is an opportunity to perform a precious service for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is a precious opportunity, and that makes me joyful. Should you feel grateful also? If you're joyful over the opportunity of doing something that's intrinsically great and worthwhile, then you should feel grateful also, because it's a good opportunity for you. So here's where you find gratitude for something, recognizing the good in it in an unexpected way. Well, it would be nice to have like a book full of strategies like this. This is what the psychologists call framing. To frame the event in a certain way that reveals a certain character to it. And don't make a mistake. Framing is not lying to yourself. It's not hallucinating. Framing is recognizing that the event really has this character. The famous example is, if you have a glass of water, and one person says it's half empty, the other person says it's half full, who's right? They're both right, of course, because it can't be half empty unless it's half full, right? That's right. It's both half empty and half full. But you can choose to see it as half full, can't you? Rather than seeing it as half empty. That's called framing. You're not lying to yourself, but you're choosing the true aspect of it, which you can relate to and will inspire you and lead you to good reactions. People who have debilitating accidents, quadriplegics, Rahman al-Islam, no use of arms and legs. Some die of despair, and some, I remember when there were postcards. You can read in the history books about something called postcards. They were little pieces of cardboard, and on one side you could write the address and write the short message. The other side there was a picture. And it was make it decorative and beautiful. And some of them you see at the bottom, painted by so-and-so quadriplegic with his toes. He learned how to paint with his toes. So, a person has an accident, and he can't use arms and legs. There are two ways to frame it. I can't run, I can't dance, I can't hold my grandchildren, my life is over. And the other is, I don't have arms and legs, what do I have? Well, I have toes. Well, I have toes, so what can I do with my toes? And so these people became artists with their toes. I heard about one guy who became a weather forecaster. He learned to type the computer with his toes. He looked at the satellite images and he became a weather forecaster. The first time I went to South Africa, I heard about a fellow who had some kind of terrible debility of this kind where he couldn't control his body. The only thing he could do is move his head like this. His mind was okay, but he could move his head like this. They set up a Gemara on a stand. They gave him something in his mouth which he could turn the pages, and he learned. He didn't die of despair. He said, what can I do? That's called framing. So here, this is one way of framing the pain as an opportunity to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu in a precious way. And that, says the Torah of the Shulchan Aruch, is the joy with which you make the blessing, and that's something which you could be grateful for. On the trip, the Rebbe was talking about, in general, how HaKadosh Baruch Hu runs the world, and where was God in the Holocaust? Why doesn't God save us from the suffering that we have? And she mentioned two reasons, which I had never thought of before. Again, it's 2 out of probably 64, but it contributes. Each one contributes. And she talked about it from the point of view of child rearing. Sometimes you see a child do something, and you know it's going to have a bad effect. And you say, I don't want my child to suffer that effect. So either you correct it, the effect, or you stop the child from doing it because you don't want the child to suffer. Sometimes you say, I want my child to learn what the results of this action are. And I want the child to have the suffering that's caused by the action, so the child will know himself that's not something appropriate to do. So I'm just following my rules. So when the child eats too much candy and he gets a stomachache, the parent could stop the child halfway through, but sometimes, once or twice, will cause the child to think, maybe this isn't worthwhile. This is something which people try, and I think it has mixed results, when a little child wants to taste schnapps, whiskey. Let's say he's 5 years old, and the adults are drinking whiskey, and he wants some whiskey. Well, you know what's going to happen? It has two results when you give it to him. First of all, it's awful. It burns his mouth. He doesn't want it anymore. But I think also, under the table, he thinks, what's wrong with these people? They're all drinking this stuff and suffering. Like, are they masochists? So there's something wrong with them. Why are they doing this? So it sometimes works, and sometimes the same thing with smoking. A person shouldn't be smoking at all, for sure. But when the child asks for a cigarette, some children, when they're given, let's say at the age of 6, a cigarette, and they cough, and they feel terrible, and they get dizzy, and they think, I don't want that. That's not a bad thing to happen. So this is one type of suffering where the person is bringing it upon himself through his bad choices, because Baruch Hu may not save him from the suffering, because he'll learn something from it, and that'll be a valuable lesson for his life. And he could thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu for that suffering. And the second that she said was even more surprising to me. Sometimes a person's actions are self-destructive. He's going to lose his social reputation, or he's going to lose an opportunity to develop one of his talents, which will be very important for him later in life. He's committing crimes which will ingrain in him attitudes and habits which are going to destroy certain capabilities for the rest of his life. And you don't want him to destroy himself. So you let him feel, or you put him, you impose upon him suffering for what he's doing, so that he doesn't make himself worse. So you ask, why did HaKadosh Baruch Hu allow the temple to be destroyed? One of the many explanations is the temple gave us great power, and we were using that power wrongly, and we would have become worse if we had maintained the use of that power. You have this with the Ben Sora Mora, a child who gets to a certain point where, given where he's sitting now, he's going to become a murderer. And what he's done is a capital crime. And the Mishnah says, better he should die now before he commits murder than he should die after he commits murder. Because he hasn't committed that horrible crime. It's better for him to suffer it now. So when you think of HaKadosh Baruch Hu running the world and look at the human being and saying, I'm not going to save this person from this suffering, because this suffering will reveal to him the real consequences of his actions, and he'll come to appreciate better and be able to improve his actions. Or the actions are making him self-destructive. So there is an idea, which is found in the Netziv and others, that suffering comes upon Jewish communities when they assimilate. Because assimilation is spiritual death. They are murdering themselves spiritually. And better they should be rejected by the host community and come to their senses and step back than to be murdered spiritually. You could see a little bit of that on October 7th. Many American Jews, leftist Jews, where the left abandoned them and treated them as murderers, they're the enlightened ones. They're the super moral ones. They're the ones that are for justice and inclusion and equity and all the rest. And then they're going to be classified as committing genocide? So wait a second, what's going on? What's going on? That's a very valuable piece of paint that they're going through. In this country, you had some who expressed themselves very, very poignantly. I realize now that I was oriented in an entirely wrong way. So if you feel that, if you appreciate that, then you look for the good in what's happening, and that can enable you to have gratitude. One of the things that challenged me for a long time, let's take the amount of time in which there was slavery in Egypt. I used to think it was like 90 years, but we came across a Rambam in the Igeres Teman where he said only 70 years after they went down, the slavery started, much longer. Now let's imagine a person who was born, lived, and died under Egyptian slavery. What kind of life is that? what kind of value could he find in that life? What could he think that was going on that was worthwhile in any way, shape, or form? If he knew that he was preparing the ground for the exodus of the Jewish people to receive the Torah at Sinai, and by living faithfully, he was building that ground, then I think he could feel very good about what he was doing. Sort of like someone who raises money for a hospital, and he knows it's going to take 10 years to build a hospital, and he probably won't be alive to see it built. But he raised the money. He knows people are going to be cured because of what he did. He may not be one of them, but so what? What he's doing is intrinsically valuable. So here too. Now, you say, but a lot of people didn't know that that was the case. Right, they didn't know it. But if they trusted the Kadosh Baruch Hu, that he has a purpose in this, then they could say, there is a purpose in this, I just don't know what it is. But if I knew what it was, then I would be satisfied. My oldest son, when he was, 14 or so, asked me the following question. If you force somebody to do something that he doesn't want to do, why should he have gratitude to you later? You forced him. Well, it says in the Mishnah, against your will you are created, against your will you are born, against your will you live, against your will you die, and against your will you're going to have to give an accounting of your life before the Creator. So since it's all against my will, I didn't choose it, I wouldn't have chosen it, so then why should I owe gratitude for it? So I said, that's a good question. I thought about it for a while, and then I said, let me ask you a question. You have a 4-year-old. He comes in from playing in the backyard. He's dirty. It's dinner time. Dinner's on the table. And you say, wash your hands. And he says, what has my father got against brown? He's prejudiced against brown because my hands are brown? I don't know. What kind of thing is that? They just ask me to wash my hands. What good does it do to wash my hands? The food's on the table. The 4-year-old doesn't know about invisible germs. All he knows is his father has this washing fetish. That I got to wash before I eat. He may resent that. He doesn't see any reason in it, does he? Okay, when he's 11 and he learns about hygiene and he learns about disease, do you expect him to change his mind? Oh, that's what my father was doing. He's protecting me from disease. Do you expect him now to have gratitude for what his father did when he was 4? Probably. So, the fact that someone forces you to do something against your will doesn't mean that it isn't good, and it doesn't mean that you can't recognize that it's good. It may just mean you have to go through more development to the point where you can recognize it. Now, having said that, going from 4 to 11, when he's 36 and something happens to him, and he knows there's a creator, and he doesn't understand why, and it's very painful, he could say, I remember when I was 4, my father forced me to do those things when I was 4. I didn't like it, and I resented it. When I was 11, I found out it was really good for me. Maybe this thing that's happening to me at 36, which is very painful, and I don't like it, maybe when I'm 50, I'll find out that it really was good for me. And indeed, what I know about Kadosh Baruch Hu, I know what he does in the world, and those consistent principles of doing everything to benefit the world, I'm confident there is something in it that's good for me, even though I don't know what it is. And if I'm confident that there is something that's good, then I can be grateful. And I want to end with one last remark. I think I heard this from somebody, I don't remember who. But if you, Victor Miller, his grandson is grandson-in-law is a Rav in Lakewood. I heard him speak a number of times. And he said, Rav Miller said, you should have a book of gratitude. Things that happened to you during the day, which were good and you felt happy about, write them down. Or your abilities that you have, write them down. You can see, you can breathe, you can walk. And the outcome is, if you concentrate on expressing gratitude, you'll be a happier person. Because everything you're grateful for means I have something that's good for me. And if you express gratitude consistently, your attitude towards your life is, my life is good. And when you think your life is good, you're a happier person. I'm not saying you should do it because it makes you happy, but the happiness is genuine, it's appropriate, and that's an outcome of emphasizing Hakaras HaTov. So these are some remarks about Hakaras HaTov.